Thank you for having me. Thank you for being here. I'll explain the table here, so I'm going to do a breakdown in about 10 minutes' time, so that's why we've put it there specifically. You've all seen the blurb. If not, it's the title of the book is called The Boy with Two Hearts. And if 5 years ago someone told me the book would be published and it'd be BBC4 Book of the Week and so on, I would have said you're crazy. Because for me, it was just my journey, my story. And I probably want to start telling you guys what that story and what journey was for me. I'll start when I was a bit younger. About 10-year-old, and maybe I'll start by a moment where I was in an audience and my mum was standing in a made-up stage giving a speech. So it's me, Hamid, a 10-year-old, my older brother, Hussein, 13, younger brother, Hassan, 3 boys. Mum always wanted daughter, but she got stuck with 3 boys, lucky for her. And we were in Afghanistan under Taliban time, and my mum, she was a motivational speaker. She was a mentor. She was telling people to chase their dreams, but she wasn't seeing that, and the frustration led to, I'm going to stand up, I'm going to talk about equality, I'm going to talk about women's rights. And I remember standing there, going, oh, Mum is like a celebrity because everyone's cheering on for her. And there was a crowd of people in local school. And I always use that example when I get nervous to do a talk to say, I can't be nervous because my mum done a talk in Afghanistan when Taliban was there. So for me to stand up, talk through the strangers, I should be okay. Doesn't help, I still get nervous. Mum gives a speech, really passionate, everyone cheers on. I felt like a celebrity. I was like, that's my mum. Went home, had an amazing food. And as we were celebrating, literally within a day, if not 2, we had a knock on the door where we found out through my uncle that the Taliban heard the speech and there was an execution order for my mum. So there I was, a 10-year-old kid, tried to have a normal life in that circumstances. And I was told, you know, your mum has said something and it's not acceptable, execution order. At that moment, I stopped being a kid. Within days, we left everything. We sold everything that we could. In my head, we left my identity. We left our family, our belongings, our home, our safety, and weirdly, my childhood. The first time I left my country was that moment. Back of a hidden compartment in a car, and after a few days, with a few stops, I pop out and we're in Moscow in Russia. And the reason we had to flee Afghanistan was for 2 reasons. One, obviously for my mum and the execution order, but as soon as we left, my older brother, which by that time has had 2 operations because of his very complex heart condition, we were told 2 places. UK and US could save your son's life. So as soon as we left, it was a race against time. I spent 6 months' time in Moscow. It was cold. It was miserable. I stood out. We got robbed. I got chased by the police. There was a moment where I thought we were getting robbed by mafia, but it was actually massive rats. Another story you have to read in a book. And 6 months later, we were told, you know, we're moving on to your next location. Ukraine jungle, getting lost again. Germany, France, Belgium, Holland, failed attempts. Back of the lorry. Robbed again at the gunpoint, this time in Germany. And you know, you hear the story, they get here back of the lorry reference. That's physically how we got in, from France. And I'll never forget this. We got to the container the day before, locked up, and my younger brother almost suffocated back at the container to come into UK. And I'll tell you my first ever experience of UK. And by the way, this took 18 months to get to UK. So 18 months later, almost like a different Hamid from the one who left Afghanistan. kind of locked up my emotions, kind of couldn't be a child, couldn't really tell my mum and dad that I'm scared because I was worried about them. And this is my first experience. So we're not on a container. The driver opens it. He's angry, he's confused. He's like, oh, just get out of the car. All I knew was UK is right-hand drive. So somewhere in the M1, I'm going to say, we're at the container, side of the motorway. The driver drives off. And we've been in a container for over a day. And myself, my dad, and my brothers needed to go toilet. So we formed a circle. Mum kind of said, I'm not going to associate myself with you guys. So she kind of walked away. And my first experience in UK is weeing in the side of a motorway. And I tell you why I'm sharing this with you guys. As I'm weeing, every car is going past and they're beeping. And I'm waving back. I was like, Dad, they're so friendly here. Look at them. But obviously, years later, I've realized it's because I should have done something in the side of the motorway. And that was my first ever experience. And within a week or two, we stayed in Margate, really beautiful city. The sea was literally by there. I was winding up my younger brother, because I always do. I'm quite childish. But that's my excuse anyway. Eventually said, we found you a place. We get in a little minibus to a little city called Cardiff. And a 12-year-old Hamid, who by the way couldn't speak English, comes to Cardiff, embraced by volunteers who are just smiling and they want me to settle down. But for me, when people from my own country wanted to kill my mum, when for me strangers robbed us along the way, where for me I felt like a parcel being passed along, I really struggled to trust strangers. So when the volunteers were trying to be helpful, in my head I was like, what is your intention? When I went to school, year 8, in a school called C.I.C. in Cardiff, and teachers were like, how are you? How can I help you? And again, let's not forget, I can't even communicate. In my head, I was saying, what's your intention? And when I was in a playground, I'd look around, and there are other kids who look like me, playing football, messing around. But I said to myself, why don't I feel like a kid? And obviously, if you can't communicate and everyone is able to actually talk, I was like, well, there's no way I can actually go on to get my GCSE and my A-level and my degree. And that played a huge factor for essentially all my high school. I got into a lot of trouble because I was defensive. I didn't let my guard down. I couldn't go to mum and dad and tell them, look, mum and dad, I'm really struggling, because they were also struggling, so I hid that from them. And that really impacted me. So I messed up my GCSEs. I had double C science, don't ask me how, double C in English, and my first language, Farsi. So that's my 5 Cs. I've never seen an A star in my life. And my teacher said, look, you need to settle down. You can go on to achieve. But again, I just never believed myself. I picked business, biology, and physics for my A-level because I wanted to be a doctor. And there was a phase I wanted to be an astronaut. And there was a phase I wanted to be a rapper. But let's be sure, none of those happened, right? Because if I was rapping, I'd take a mic out and I'd be, doing a little breakdance for you, which is not happening. And I remember going in to get my results for my A-level, or for my AS, and my teacher said, you've got you, and you. And that really had an impact on me, because that was the confirmation that Hamid, who believed he's not going to get anywhere, did happen. I was embarrassed, I was ashamed, because I was a bit of a troublemaker. I didn't even wanted to see anyone, because if they said to me, Hamid, what are you up to? I'd be saying, well, I failed my A-levels. I even picked PE. This is how sad it is, right? Because I thought I'd be a good footballer. But I didn't realize 60% of PE is actually theory. So I messed that one too along the way. My older brother at the time having consultant meetings for his heart, back and forth, back and forth. And there I was, in a consultant room in Southampton with my older brother. And he's telling him, Hussein, you'll be the 21st person to ever have this operation, the youngest person to ever have this operation. 2 places, Chicago and Southampton, that will do this operation. And it's a 60% success rate. And my brother just looked at him and he said, yeah, that's fine. Where do I sign to let's do this. I remember saying to my brother, you do realize what he just said, the 60% success rate. It's a higher risk, you might not go through. He said, look, I've come into UK, they've given me so much. I want to get the operation done. I want to get well. I want to finish my degree. I want to get a job and I want to give back to NHS. I was so proud of my brother at that moment. But at the same time, I had the realization, the Hamid who's been complaining about everything, the language, the weather, the culture, anything you can think of. I mean, today is a nice day, so I can't really use the weather. My brother had all the same challenges, but he had a very complex heart condition. Luckily, he had a success operation, a 14.5-hour operation, from taking half of his top right of his heart out, Gore-Tex pipe, pacemaker, maze, whatever you can think of. And while he was in recovery, he was like, yeah, I want to give back to these guys. I want to come back to NHS and help out. And somehow he pulled some strings. He got me to do a foundation degree in a computer science course in a local university. And weirdly, they were just lacking for numbers to get in, and I got in. But I got my head down. It was no longer about me, it was about my brother. I went on to get a degree. I went on to start working in organizations. And I had another moment in my first job where they call it the so-called imposter syndrome. When I walked in and I said, this isn't right. I shouldn't really be here. I don't fit in. And I had all this baggage in my head that was really holding me back. I started sharing my story with going to school and universities and organizations. So I felt like I don't need to, I never thought I could write a book. That's the first thing, right? My younger brother makes a joke that I've never read a book, which I can neither confirm or deny. I have. Of course I've read The Boy with Two Hearts, so that's definitely up there. But I remember going into schools, universities, and telling my story, telling people that, look, no matter where you've come from, you can achieve whatever you want to achieve. Have crazy dreams. And this went on for years, careers and careers and careers. So I never felt I was telling my story through a different format. I think what changed for me in 2018 was my older brother suddenly passed away. I remember getting a call saying your brother isn't well, going into hospital. He's like, I said, what's happened? He said, I don't know, I'm just not feeling well. Going to CCU. And I remember the doctor, Dr. Masani, who's known him for 17 years, saying to me, my mum, my dad, and my brother, his pacemaker is firing, but his heart's had enough. And it was the first time I didn't need to translate anything to mum and dad. They knew. I remember me and my brother being pulled into his bedside and my brother telling us off, telling us to look after mum and dad, telling us to get married, have grandchildren, bring happiness. And even though I didn't want to say goodbye, he wanted to say goodbye. And then I remember the nurses once again being there for us. The nurses who've known us for years. And I remember they were crying with us, and I was saying to myself, you need to be the strong one for me to be able to cope with this, but you're crying and the doctor's crying. The next few days was a blur trying to sort out the process of burying your brother and funeral and etc. I'd done a post on social media, on Facebook, saying, my brother's passed away. If anyone wants to come and, pay respect to funeral. What I didn't expect is people posting on social media, on Facebook, saying, he paid for my food, he was there for me, he helped me emotionally. And on the funeral day, there was total random strangers who wanted to pay their respect. And then I had another realization. I wanted to write. Don't ask me why. At that moment, I said, this just feels right. And I think I didn't know, but for me, that was part of my grieving process. So in 3 months' time, I did lock myself in a room, I did cry, but I wrote 86,000 words. And then I started to have this crazy dream that not only I want to cement my brother's legacy, I want to be able to tell Mum and Dad that he will never be forgotten. Again, I had no intention of the BBC4 Book of the Week. I had no idea what it was, I'll be completely honest. I wrote and wrote and wrote. I had my brother and my best friend saying, look, it's going to take time. And there I was, no. I have full belief this is going to go big, it's going to go crazy. I wanted to be on TV to say, Mum and Dad, look, there's your story, there's your son's story. I reached out to a random editor on LinkedIn saying, look, I've got a story, can you help me? She said, yeah, what is it? We had a title called Defiance, the Defiance one. And then randomly one night at 2 a.m. in the morning, I thought the title, The Boy with Two Hearts, I thought that's really catchy. It's a metaphor of, a faulty heart, but a heart and a will that he wanted to go on. And in, I want to say summer 2020, the book was officially published. What I didn't realize when I was writing the book, and we'll come on with the Q&A, is how much I learned about myself. Self-reflection of what I was a young child to my adulthood, why I made certain decisions along the way, why I hid my emotions. I never forget when I had the first copy of the book. I went to London, they gave me proof of copy. I sat back in a train and I remember looking at it and I just broke down in tears. I've said, I've done the impossible. I don't think Mum and Dad knew the magnitude of what was going on at that moment. Book was published. BBC4 Book of the Week happened. I remember Sanjeev Bhaskar, who obviously is the narrator of the BBC4 book, reaching out to me on Twitter saying, I'm honored to be reading your book. And I said to my younger brother, he's like an actor and celebrity. He's reaching out to me. This is like a really weird dynamic. And I said, thanks. I didn't know what else to say to him. And I remember driving past Wales Millennium Centre, the Golden Dome. And I don't know why it popped into my head. I said to my dad, one day, I'm going to take our story into that stage. My dad responds saying, you're crazy, in Farsi. Probably a few other words, but I'm going to summarize it. He said, yeah, you're crazy. I remember walking in, somehow made a connection, and I said to exec producer, look, I think I've got a story that's really powerful. They just wanted to hear, what I've got to say. They probably thought he's so annoying, he's pestering, I'm just going to listen to him for an hour and he'll just go away. They were so wrong. I sat in a cafe, I met him, I spoke about the book, and I said, look, I'll give you a copy. He went quiet for 3 months, 6 months, back and forth. And eventually I remember meeting the lady called Emma Evans in there, and she said, we're going to bring your book into a theatre show. And then she said, have you been to theatre? I said, no. She said, okay, you might want to go to theatre to understand what theatre is. So I had some free tickets to watch some shows, and I was like, oh, wow, this is just unreal. I wonder how my story is going to look like on the stage. Fast forward to 2021, October, November time. First opening show of The Boy with Two Hearts at Wales Millennium Centre. And we were at the third row, and he had Amiri sort of tags, which I quickly ripped off because I don't want people to know I'm sitting there with my dad and my brother and my wife and her family. We sat down. We had masks. This is during the COVID sort of coming out of the COVID period. And it was the first show Wales Millennium Centre have sort of started post-COVID. I sat there, we cried and we laughed. I kept looking at my dad and he just wanted to be quiet. He said, my mum, she just couldn't bear herself to come in to watch the show. And there was a moment at the end of the show when I said to my dad, everyone's here, everyone's laughing and crying with you. That show went on for 3.5 weeks. And in 2022, if that wasn't enough, we took it to London National Theatre. 6.5 weeks. I went to so many shows and people said, why do you keep coming back to watch the play? You've seen it, isn't it hard? And I said, tell me an opportunity when someone is no longer around, you are able to feel the essence, you're able to feel the cheekiness, the laughter on the stage. That's what it was for me. Yeah, the run in National Theatre, and maybe I can tell you guys officially or unofficially, it will be doing international later this year. I cannot confirm the locations for various reasons. With one message behind of me writing the book. Well, multiple messages. One, to thank my parents for what they've sacrificed. One, to cement a legacy for my older brother. To be able to say to mum and dad, even though he's no longer around, he will never be forgotten. One, to hopefully inspire others that every story matters, no matter how you think it doesn't or isn't special. One, probably for me, to be able to cope and understand what I made the decisions that I did. And I guess one for NHS and Cardiff and Wales to say thank you, because NHS helped me settle down. Cardiff is my home. I came to Cardiff 2001 and I still live in Cardiff because it is my home. I've got the nod to do the breakdancing, so this is the nod for that. So for me, that's my message. That's why I wrote The Boy with Two Hearts. This won't be the last time you hear that title, The Boy with Two Hearts. There'll be other versions of it. There might be something on TV. I can again neither confirm or deny if that is the case, due to various reasons. But I want to say everyone's story has a purpose, has a reason, and I'll encourage everyone to be able to share or just write the story. And I'm going to pause there.
Yeah. Just before, I just want to say thank you so much, and I just really feel that it's such a pleasure to have you here, and thank you for coming. It's the most extraordinary story.
Thank you.
And I just want to mention to people as well, in case I forget later, we do have copies of the book in the cafe for sale. So if Hamid doesn't mind signing, if anybody wants to get a signed book for that, that would be amazing. Now, what I'd like to do is just spend the last 15 minutes opening the floor up, really, for questions. I've got this here. This is what we're going to amplify you. What this does is it feeds into our filming system so that we can hear your question when we're basically recording this so we can share it. Does anyone have a question, or shall I kick things off? I'll start then, Hamid. I'm really fascinated by the story, but also I think, because I mentioned to you earlier, one of the big motivations for setting this event up was actually the therapeutic power of writing, how it can really help us. And for many of us, that means that writing never necessarily is seen. And I just wanted to ask you a little more about that and to expand on that, if you would.
Yeah, of course. I think for me, the book allowed me to put my emotions into words.
Yeah.
But also, I had this quote where it's easy to talk to a stranger about your emotions and what you're going through. But imagine you have that stranger in front of you as a book, all access to it all the time, or just write, journal. Because for me, I essentially journaled my life from the age of 10 to my mid-20s. I didn't initially had the intention to be a beautiful book of the week and a theatre and etc. But when I finished it and I played it back to people, they said, you do know that was your grieving process. That was for you to understand why you made certain decisions. So for me, it's really having access to just be able to open up. And you can share as much as or as little as you want, knowing you have that safety net or being judged or etc. So for me, that's a really powerful tool.
Yeah. And when you mentioned you sat down in the space of weeks, wrote thousands and thousands of words.
Yeah.
Did that come naturally to you? Is that something you'd done before? Or was this really the first time you'd attempted that?
First time ever. I struggled with the intro, right? Because in my head I was like, oh, where do I start? Where's the starting point? And in my head I said, well, look, naturally, if I'm talking about my journey, this is where it is. And it kind of just flew, because it's in my head it was sequential. The 18 months journey, that country, that country, that country. And I'll be completely honest, the final chapter, which is me saying goodbye to Moldova, that took me a month to write. Right. So 2 months to write, call it 80,000 words, and a month to write the chapter, because I was physically exhausted, me reliving those moments. But I've now captured those moments, be as hard as it was, but I put the words that my brother said to me. The cheekiness of the night before, we having and this is true, the night before the day he passed away, me, my older brother, my younger brother, having a quabble over a Subway dirty nachos. We got him because he was in hospital. He was just staying in for a few days. And he was saying, go put that in the nurse's fridge. And we were arguing that I'm not going to do it, my brother should do it. I never forget this, but I've captured that and it's there. And it's those memories that over time you could lose, where for me, they're there forever. Yeah.
Well, it's, as you described, I mean, it's a never-ending testament and testimony to your brother and the love you had for him, and you say sounds incredible. I've got lots more questions, but I don't want to hog if anybody else has any. Would you like to? I'll just pass this to you. There you go. Just have to hold it. Okay.
Thank you so much. So moving. I'm useless at language, and I'm just fascinated that you have written in English when Farsi is your first language. And how have you found writing in English? You said you were journaling from the age of 10, so was that originally all in Farsi and then translated? How did you do it?
So I wasn't journaling. I think in my head, I was telling a story constantly. But what's interesting that you asked that question, there are certain aspects in the book when I was writing. I was struggling to come up with the English word because it was in Farsi, the emotions that I felt, or the analogies. So we've got so many analogies in the Persian sort of world or the Afghan world that I couldn't find the comparison in English. And there are certain of those are in the book and certain aren't, because I just couldn't find them. But for me, being in here for 20 years, I'm flicking between the two quite naturally. And because I think I was standing up and talking about certain aspects of my journey, I think I knew roughly what I wanted to say. But weirdly, I was watching a program not so long ago that they say, what language do you count in your head? Or what is your language you talk in your head? And for me, I don't know if it's normal or odd. I don't really want to question my brain. It flicks between the two. So when I do counting, it's actually in Farsi. I would say when I go to gym and I do reps, but that's a lie because I've not been for the past month because I've been fasting. And certain aspects is in English. So, yeah, really interesting question. It's okay.
Any more? Anybody else would like?
Thank you so much. It was so moving. Thank you. Yes, when you said that as a child, when you first came to the UK, that you had a difficulty about trust, understandably so. Did you ever have any counselling or any help in any way at all?
No. I didn't, but I think my younger brother did. The thing is, I was quite stubborn and, this macho behaviour that I don't need help. So even if it was tried to be offered, I was like, no, I don't need this. So I created that bravado of, I'm okay, I'm strong-minded, stubborn, etc., etc. And even if it was offered, I wouldn't have taken it.
I see. It's really interesting, thank you.
Okay.
So in a way, you were, through the book, you were sort of counselling yourself in a way.
I was.
And perhaps you wouldn't have the book if you had been counselled.
That's a very question. I would say I would have written the book because of my older brother, no matter what. But you are right. Through the book, I learned so much about myself, the decisions that I made, that I shouldn't have made. But I always say, if I didn't, I wouldn't be who I am today.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone else like to ask a question?
So thank you so much. I was very fortunate enough to see the play as well. But I'm very interested with your writing from going from a book to a play, and then also the VR Ripples of Kindness experience, which was phenomenal. So shortening your whole story to like 15 minutes. How did you find that, knowing how best to do your story?
Really good question. Theatre was a weird experience because the book was from my perspective. The theatre, obviously, where everyone and it internalized certain conversation between the parents and etc. So me and my brother, mum and dad had a lot of conversation about, well, what did you actually say at that moment? And what really helped the actors is actually me be able to say, I was feeling like this in that situation and in that situation. I had to remove myself for the theatre and say, this is a story about a family going through that journey, and I know what that journey is like. And every now and then I'd catch myself throughout the play, especially towards the end when the pictures comes up. And by the way, if anyone's missed a play, it is on NT at home. You can go watch it. Not that I'm plugging, but just mentioned it just popped in my head. When the pictures came up at the end of the play, I had the realization, oh, that's actually my story. That's actually my family. That's actually my life. And it hit me, and that's the moment I cried the most because I removed myself and I came back into it. The VR was, again, I loved it because my background is IT. So when the guy said we want to do a virtual reality experience called Ripple of Kindness, like, what are the bits we want to cover? And I said, well, look, Mum's speech had a really profound impact. My brother plays a huge aspect. NHS plays a huge aspect. And then we had user stories. And I'll be honest, the guys, the experts, is the ones who pull it together. And me and my younger brother being the critics saying, no, I don't like this. No, I don't like that. Oh, this should be more of this and a bit more of this. And I was never content with a VR version of myself because I had really weird fingers. But it was what it was. So yeah, and I never knew I had a creative side because someone who does IT, you're supposed to be very logical. But when I opened my mind, and I know it sounds really weird, my soul into storytelling, I realized actually I do have a creative side because theatre is very creative, VR is very creative, even book itself is very creative, and be able to visualize and vividly tell a story. So yeah.
Amazing, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for your talk. My question is in two parts. Do you take an interest in what's happened in Afghanistan since you left, and do you have another book in you?
The second one is easy, yes. Probably multiple. I'm actually in process of writing one now, and there's another one that I'd love to write is actually what happened after The Boy with Two Hearts. For me, breaks my heart. So when the play came out, it was when the Taliban were going back to Afghanistan, and someone said to me, "You've timed this really well." I said, "Well, actually, this was in a pipeline way before." And I remember saying this, I wish I was telling a story that was from the past, but what weirdly happened is the story is what was happening at that time, and it still is. I have family back home. I have my uncles, my aunties, my cousins back home. I have to be optimistic and believe that in my lifetime there will be some peace and prosperity. And the reason is, if I don't believe in it, then I've accepted that's how it's going to be. Even though from the moment I was born and the moment I left, there's always been something going on back home in Afghanistan. I actually tried to go back 6-7 years ago, and my uncle said, this is before the Taliban obviously kind of re-invaded Afghanistan. He said, don't. And I said, why? He goes, even though you don't see on the news, there's a lot of kidnapping happening in Afghanistan, in my city, Herat. And one of my cousins, who was 14, got kidnapped, got chucked down a well for $500. I'd want to go back. Because to me, even though Cardiff is my home and Wales is my home, and I've picked up a slight Welsh accent, Afghanistan, Herat is where I grew up, where I was born, and I want my children to know this is where I was, and see my cousins and my uncle and my aunties. So yeah, I'd love to go back. I've always said the book tells the story behind the numbers of refugees and why they make those journeys. If my brother didn't need the medication and the executioner, I would have stayed. Why would I want to leave everything behind, my family, my belongings? So I think that narrative gets lost with media and what's going on. But I've always said I don't want the book to be used for political perspective. It's a story of family and love, which I think is why it done really well in theatre. But when you read the story, you also subconsciously realise what the word refugee means and why that family made that journey. Thank you for that question.
Time for one last question, I think. Okay. Well, I was actually, Nigel beat me to it in terms of the next book. So I just wondered if, do you have ideas of things that are you thinking about fiction? Are you thinking about, what's your?
A bit of both.
Okay.
So I have one that isn't, it's essentially, I said, it's what happened when my brother passed away. So because The Boy with Two Hearts kind of end with me saying goodbye. I want to talk about grief. I want to talk about the process of writing a story led me to X, Y, Z. Mm-hmm. I want to weirdly inspire others to say, look, for me, a person who's never read a book, say so, has managed to write, turn into a play, and etc. Mm. And I have a really powerful intro and an outro of the book that I'd want to incorporate. So that's one. Another one is people were always fascinated on, there's a character in the play, not a character, a person called Soran, who was the smuggler, took us from France to UK. And we failed the first time. The second time, he took us for free. And everyone said to me, why a smuggler showed kindness? And what I want to do is explore why people turn into smugglers. People that I know, someone that I know, he said his dad actually became a smuggler because he wanted to help people get out of the country to safety. So the story that I want to unravel is actually that aspect of a smuggler, what happened along the way. And exclusively for this room, because you guys, the first time I'm telling this, in the book, I want the smuggler to meet the Amiri family and what happened at that moment that changed that perspective. And he said, no more smuggling, and I want to help you, and X, Y, Z. So that's a crazy, wacky idea that I have on the book side. But I want to do more theatre. I want to do more creative stuff. Still have a full-time job in IT. Yeah. So bear that in mind.
Well, that just sounds extraordinary. I'm excited already by the next book. I can see it. I can see it as a TV drama as well now. That's a brilliant note to end on. And like I said before, I just can't thank you enough for coming to visit us and share your story. It's been
thank you for having me.
It's just been incredible. Thank you so much.
Thank you.